Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here again with another installment of my complete analysis of all 389 Bach chorale harmonizations. Today we're going to be looking at Christum wir sollen loben schon, which translates to "We should now praise Christ." This is a really interesting chorale. I'm pretty much certain that it's a modal chorale, in the sense that we have two sharps in the key signature, which implies D major, B minor territory, but we really don't get that until the latter part of the chorale. We start off on E minor, we get a lot of E minor throughout, and it's a really interesting chorale with a lot of like modal twists and turns. There's some interesting chromaticism, and there's this really fascinating figure at the end with this held whole note at the end in the soprano, and the inner voices as well. They get it in the penultimate measure. But all in all, there's some really interesting things going on here. Let's get into the analysis. So, two sharps in the key signature. We end on F sharp major and we start on E minor. Now this is a really interesting chorale for that reason. I'm pretty certain we start in the key of E minor. At least it sounds like the melody is in the key of E minor. It goes E, F sharp, G, like that in the beginning, and then it goes up to the B, and then we get a half cadence on B major, which is what makes me feel like we are in the key of E minor. So let's go ahead and analyze it in the key of E minor. So we start off with our E minor triad and root position, then the bass leaps up and the rest of the voices rotate. We get E minor for 3 beats in total, passing 7th in the bass, and then we have C sharp, A, E, and A. And this is where the modality comes in, because we have this C sharp and the bass here. This is not an A minor triad, which is what we would expect in the key of E minor. This is an A major triad, so an uppercase 4. So this was like the equivalent of melodic minor, but usually we don't include the raised 6th in the scale degree. We don't usually include the raised 7th in the scale degree because the key signature would look kind of weird, but it's interesting to see sort of melodic minor in this context here. But then we get D sharp, A, F sharp, and B. That is our B7 chord over D sharp, so our 5-6. And then we have E, G, F sharp, and B. We know that a 1 chord is being implied here, but it's really just suspension, a 9/8 suspension that gets delayed for a beat. We then get G, B, E, and E, just a first inversion E minor triad. Then we have F sharp, A, D sharp, and A. It's a D sharp diminished triad in first inversion, so that would be 7-6. We then have E, B, E, and G. Root position tonic triad, a 1 chord. Let me rewrite that, it got a little small. And then we cadence on B major, B, B, D sharp, and F. It's our 5 chord. Okay, good. So looking ahead to the next cadence, we have a plagal cadence actually in the key of D major. So going from E minor to D major, there's not really a common chord here. It just sounds like it goes straight from E minor to D major. You could force a common chord analysis onto this, but it doesn't sound like the phrases blend together harmonically, at least in terms of a pivot chord. So I think this is a direct modulation. I'll go ahead and just write that D there as opposed to using a bracket to indicate a common chord. But if you wanted to indicate a common chord, this F sharp could be 5 of 6. This D major chord could be 7. But I just don't hear it that way. Yeah, it just sounds like we're right off in the key of D major. But if you wanted to analyze it with a common chord, this D could be 7 and it could go to 1. Actually, the more that I think about it, should I do it that way? No, it sounds like a direct modulation to me. This sounds like a brand new idea, especially after a dotted half note. It sounds like we're going directly to D. Even though this 7-6 chord is going to E minor, if we were thinking in terms of E minor, that would be a totally suitable analysis, but I'm going to analyze it first the way that I analyzed it in my notes, and then I'll show an analysis where we have a common chord modulation from key to key. So here we have a D major triad over F sharp, that would be 1-6. We then have an E minor triad, E, E, G, and B. There's our 2 chord, passing tone in the soprano. And then we have D, A, F sharp, and D. That is a root position tonic triad with some passing tones in the bass and the alto. We then have F sharp, A, and D. That's just a first inversion tonic triad. Some more passing tones in the lower voices. We then have A, C sharp, E, and C sharp. That is our 5 chord in root position. We have some passing tones in the inner voices. Then we move on to the next measure. And if you wanted to show this as a common chord analysis, you could do something like 7-6. No, sorry, that's not what you would write. Apologies there. I need to get a new eraser as well. A reminder for me to get a new eraser. You could say that in the key of E minor, this is 7-6. And then you could say that this is 1, which is now 2 in the key of D major. I think that would be a suitable analysis as well, depending on how you hear it. I hear this immediately as D major, so that's why I'll offer this analysis if you like to use common chords. You could even say that this 7 is 1 in the key of D major, depending on how you look at it. But like I said, this is more of like a direct modulation in my ears rather than a common chord modulation. It just doesn't sound like a common chord is being used. Then we have E, E, G, and B. Even though we are in the key of D major, we're still seeing a lot of E minor. We have a passing tone in the tenor, F sharp, C sharp, F sharp, and A. Remember, this is not F sharp major, but F sharp minor in root position. So that would just be a root position 3 chord, passing 7th in the alto. We then have G, B, D, and B. That's a root position G major triad, or a 4 chord. So we have some parallel harmony going on here. So it's like 5, we would expect 1, but it goes backwards, 2, 3, 4. Almost as if he's delaying the cadence harmonically, which is interesting. Then we have B, B, G, and D. That's just inverting the G major triad, so that would be G major over B. Another passing tone in the bass, and then we cadence on D major. And this is why it is a plagal cadence. It's 4 going to 1. Okay, looking ahead to the next cadence, we have a really interesting cadence here. We cadence on B major, but it really sneaks up on us, so I don't fully know what kind of cadence this is, but to me it sounds like a half cadence, but we'll put a question mark there because we'll talk about it when we get to it. Harmonically, it sounds like we're in the key of D major right up until the cadence. It's another one of those cadences where we see the D sharp, we see the C natural, and we're like, okay, we might be in the realm of E minor here, but it happens right up at the cadence. So let's take a look at it when we get there. We're in D major up until that point. All right, another D major triad. The voices just rotate, the upper voices, that is. Then we have some passing tones. Then we have B, F sharp, D, and B. That is a 6 chord, B minor triad in root position. Passing tones. And then we have kind of the same chord again because it's still over this. And then the C sharp gets introduced, and it doesn't really change the quality because C sharp, B, F sharp, and D, that would be some type of incomplete chord. It's not really analyzable using the vocabulary, Bach's harmonic vocabulary. So it's just a kind of like a delayed passing tone. We'll just mark it like that. And then on this beat, this is where the chord inverts. Then we get another passing tone, and then we have F sharp, A, F sharp, and C sharp. Again, we have an F sharp minor chord, even though, B minor is the key signature, and we would sort of expect A sharps. We're getting F sharps, or A naturals rather. So this is just a root position 3 chord in the key of D major. We have a passing 7th in the alto, and then we have G, B, D, and B. That's our root position 4 chord, G major. Passing tones in the inner voices, F sharp, D, F sharp, and A. That is our tonic triad in first inversion. E, G, G, and B. There's an E minor triad in root position. That would be a 2 chord. Passing tones in the tenor and the soprano. We then have B, B, D, and D. So that would be a fifthless 6 chord. So we have some interesting progressions here. Not progressions that I would expect usually, but sometimes Bach likes to go in the reverse of the circle of fifths. We see 3 to 4 with somewhat regularity, like 6 going to 3. It usually is flipped around, but I've been talking about the transitive property. Like if one can go in one direction, the voice leading should be just as smooth in the other direction, right? Because the chords are adjacent to one another in the cycle. But either way, we'll just keep analyzing. D, B, F sharp, and D. That's just taking the same chord as before and turning it into a 6. But because it's a new system, I'll rewrite the Roman numerals. Some passing tones in the lower voices. F sharp, D, F sharp, and A. That is a first inversion D major chord. Passing tones in the outer voices. Then we have A, F sharp, and F sharp. Sorry, A, C sharp, F sharp, and F sharp. That is an F sharp minor triad over A, so that would be 3, 6. Really interesting progressions here. Then we have D. Here's the most interesting chord in the entire chorale. We have B, D sharp, F sharp, and G sharp. Really interesting chord. If you can work that out, that is a G augmented 7 chord. G augmented triad with a minor 7th, so it's like a 7 sharp 5. In the key of D major, that would be 4, 6, 5, but it would be plus 4 plus 6, 5 in the key of E major or D major. But I think this is where we modulate. And this is sort of like the modal quality of it, because this F sharp minor would otherwise be F sharp diminished in the key of E minor, and that would be an easier chord to modulate with. But this is sort of where it sounds like the modulation happens. It happens right here, and it's very instantaneous. But here in the key of E minor, which we are in for a little bit, at least that's what it sounds like to me, because I analyzed this as a half cadence. This would be a 3, 6, 5, and that would be the byproduct of the melodic minor scale, right? Because when we raise the 6th, right, or when we raise the 7th, which is what this D sharp is, the chord is augmented, and that usually wants to go to 4, which it does. C, E, E, and A goes to a first inversion A minor triad. And notice how we have C natural here as opposed to C sharp, which is the last time we saw a 4 chord in the key of E minor, which is interesting, right? We have minor 4, 6 here rather than major 4, 6. And then we cadence on 5. And this would be actually technically one of those Phrygian half cadences, which is interesting. It sounds really weird. I had to pause and listen, and I'm like, oh, what does that sound? And oh, it's this inverted augmented triad. And augmented triads are really interesting. Yeah, they're super interesting because of the fact that an augmented triad, if you invert it, or augmented triads, like if you added another major third on top of it, it's just the octave, right? Because if you had G, B, D sharp, and then a major third above D sharp would be F double sharp, which is enharmonically equivalent to G. So you can't invert the triad. But when you add a 7th on top of it and you cap it, like you make the chord a tetrachord, that's when you get like a really, hip sounding jazz sound with the 7 with the sharp 5. And that's what's happening here. And it's happening in passing, so it's very brief. It's very fleeting, but the harmony progresses the way that you would expect. Like you get what would it be? Like 3, it would be 3, 6 going, or it would be an augmented triad going to 4, which is what we would expect. And then we cadence on 5, and we technically have a Phrygian half cadence. That's what it sounds like to me, but what muddies the analysis a little bit is the fact that it happens so quick. When the modulation happens really quick to the cadence, I feel like we don't have vocabulary to fully label what these cadences are, because it sounds like D major up until the very last minute, and it almost sounds like we're cadencing on a secondary dominant, but the vocabulary we have is like a half cadence because we could look at that excerpt in the key of E minor. So maybe we need more of a broadened vocabulary to describe what's happening here with a label rather than with like a paragraph, which is what I just spoke. So, okay, now moving on. It sounds like the melody is in the key of G major for a considerable portion of the second phrase, or this, I guess it's technically the fourth phrase, which is quite long, but it sounds like E minor through here, E, F sharp, G. So that's what I think is happening here. We go G, B, E, and E. It'll be an E minor triad in first inversion. Then we have F sharp, B, D sharp, and F sharp. That's technically we'll go ahead and say that that's a 5-6-4. It's a passing chord, and it sort of brightens it makes the progression a little bit more interesting, for sure. And then we get a 1 chord on the next beat. Passing tone in the alto, E, B, G, and G. That's just another E major or E minor triad, but I think around here is where we modulate to the key of G major. And we can go ahead and recontextualize this E minor chord as 6 of the next key. And then here we have another sort of quick harmonic rhythm going on. We have B, D natural, F sharp, and B. That would be our, this is a D, 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 F sharp, and B. That would be another 3 chord. Again with 6 going to 3. Where's more 6s going to 3? 6 going to 3. It's interesting because it's usually the other way around. But this would be a 3-6 chord in the key of G major. We then have C, E, E, and C. That would be a kind of like an incomplete 4 chord. But all the voices are moving, so I try to analyze that because that seems more significant than most other passing tones or passing tone combinations. We then have B, F sharp, D, and D. It's like a root position 3 chord, right? It's like 3, 4, 3. And then we have A, F sharp, C, D. That's kind of like a passing 5 chord, but this time it's in second inversion. And we'll mark those as passing tones because clearly the harmonic rhythm has changed here. The voices are much more active, so I feel like the analysis seems a little bit more meaningful, especially when a 1 chord happens immediately afterwards. When you go from 3 directly to 1, the chords don't change that much, right, because they share 2 tones in common. So I think Bach, in the interest of making the texture interesting, what he ends up doing is changing or adding passing chords, or passing tones are added to the texture, which in turn add chords to the analysis. So we have G, G, B, and D. There's our tonic triad. So 5 going to 1 makes more sense than 3 going to 1 in the grand scheme of things, especially when it's just like 3, 3, 1. 3, 4, 3, 5, 1 is much more interesting. Okay. A, G, C, and D. That's not analyzable. That's just those are just passing tones. B, G, D, and B. That's just a first inversion G major triad. C, G, E, and B. It's kind of like a 4 chord. But here I don't feel like the harmonic rhythm is as... maybe it is. We'll go ahead and mark it. Why not? Root position 4 chord, kind of, sort of, with the 7th Maybe there's a 7th in there, who knows. Then we have D, D, F sharp, and A. Root position 5 chord, D major in root position. Some passing tones. E, G, F, and D. That doesn't change the analysis. And then we have D, F sharp, and F sharp. That's interesting. But yeah, I don't think that's real. It's really just a big 5 chord here. And here we have A, F sharp, E, and G. Yeah, I don't think there's really anything happening there too. It's just a lot of counterpoint and interesting rhythms or interesting sounds. We have B, F sharp, D, and A. That's a B7 chord, so we would be thinking about E minor in this case, but the melody still sounds like we're not moving towards E minor, but we're kind of moving towards B minor in anticipation for this last cadence, right? Because this last cadence is, I think, a half cadence in the key of B minor, but I think it also has qualities of perfect authentic, or no, not perfect authentic, but some type of authentic cadence. No, it has to be a half cadence because it's B minor going to F sharp, but because we get F sharp for such a long time, it sounds like an authentic cadence. Maybe it could be an authentic cadence if it sounds like F sharp minor to you. I don't know. We'll take a look at it when we get there. But we have B. We have this 5-7 of 6 chord, right? Because B7 is the dominant of E minor. And then we get a deceptive progression, right? We go from B7 to C major, C, E, E, and G. That'd be a 4 chord. That'd be the equivalent in E minor of 5 going to 6. 5-7 of 6 going to 4 in a major key is the same as the relative minor going from 5 to 6. So it's a cool substitution. Then we have A sharp, C sharp, E, and F sharp. So that would be an F sharp major chord. That would be 5, 6, 5 of 3 because F sharp is the dominant of B minor. B minor is the third, or the mediant of G major, and I think this is where we modulate. This is when we start to see consistent A sharps and C sharps moving forward, D naturals as well. So I think we've modulated to B minor here, and this is actually 5, 6, 5. No need for the secondary dominant. And then we have kind of a little passing tone here. Accented non-chord tone, D, F sharp, A sharp, and F sharp. That would be like an augmented triad. I think that just happens in passing, but it's interesting that we get another augmented triad in the texture. Okay, next beat we would expect B minor, B, B, D, and F sharp. That is in fact B minor. We have some non-chord tones. This F sharp is a chord tone, so I won't mark it. But then we have D, D, F sharp, and F sharp. Or sorry, D, B, F sharp, and F sharp. So that just rotates the chord to first inversion. Another passing tone. Then we have F sharp, B, F sharp, and F sharp. I think this B is a suspension over the F sharp, a 4-3 suspension. And this is actually a 5 chord in root position. And then we have B, G sharp, F sharp, and F sharp. G, B, F sharp, and F sharp. That would be kind of like a 6 chord, right? It kind of would be like a 6 chord over the F sharp. Yeah. Let's see, it would be like a 6-4-2. This isn't the first time we've seen 6-4-2 chords actually. It'd be G, F sharp, but we would expect it to be, we don't have a D sharp to contextualize it, so that's what's interesting. Yeah, well, we'll write 6-4-2 there. We would expect 6-4-2 to be major, but we don't have B sharp. Am I doing that right? G sharp, B natural, so that's a minor third, F sharp, and F sharp. We don't have a D to make it diminished, and that's what we really need. So we'll mark it there as if it's implied, but there's no D. There's no D in this texture to make it the diminished triad we would expect. Then we have E, C sharp, A sharp, and F. And these are all non-chord tones. We could actually make an argument, hold on, it might make more sense if we just say that this G sharp and this B are accented non-chord tones, and in fact, the chord on this beat right here is turning into 4-2, because this would be the 7th of the chord. Let me write it underneath the beat. Yeah. Okay, I think that that's a better analysis of that. Okay, good. Put it in parentheses as well because it's happening on an off beat. And then we have D, D, B, and F sharp. That is a tonic triad, so B minor in first inversion, passing tone in the bass. We then have another B minor triad here in root position, neighboring leading tone. Then we have another root position. That's not a non-chord tone, sorry. It's a D, so that we would put this in first inversion here. The C sharp is a non-chord tone, and then it goes back to a root position here before we cadence on F sharp major, but with some suspensions in the inner voices. So that would be 5, and then these are also non-chord tones. So it'd be like a big 1 going to 5, a really prolonged cadence, almost like an instrumental cadence, or part of like not a chorale, but like a chorus section. This was a very difficult chorale to analyze, all things considered, and this was one of the more difficult ones to analyze just harmonically, like looking at the Roman numerals, trying to make sense of the progressions. I don't fully know, exactly what's going on here with this cadence, or what's going on here with this augmented triad. Whether we're in the the Dorian mode with E minor, or really what's going on here. I think we can try and take this chorale and look at it through a tonal lens, but really there's a lot of intricacy going on where I think Bach is taking a melody that was written before his time and is trying to impart his harmonic vocabulary onto it. And all in all, it has some very beautiful moments, very interesting cadential structure, no perfect authentic cadences, which is really interesting. The ending cadence here kind of feels like an authentic cadence after like the just the natural slowing down of the tempo at the end, and the fact that we have this like really elaborate suspension pattern at the end as well. It kind of feels like F sharp is being honored in more than just a half cadence kind of way, which makes it feel very modal. Where, like I said in, I think I mentioned this in the previous video, where in Renaissance music, music would be modal, and in modal music, at least at cadences, it's not uncommon for the composers to have cadenced on just vertical consonances, regardless of whether or not they were functioning like a tonic or a dominant. And that's, I think, largely in part due to the fact that vocabulary didn't really exist yet. But they had the idea of like the final and the tenor of the mode, so there were some tones that were used more frequently than others as focal points. But if you look at some Renaissance repertoire, you'll see that there are interesting cadential figures where they would, highlight or honor different notes in the scale that were otherwise not functioning like our dominant and tonic, our 1 and 5. But all in all, this was a really fascinating chorale to analyze. I'm really excited to find more chorales that have like modal influence and interesting, tidbits that kind of are reaching back further in history, because Bach, the Baroque period really was a transitional time, and even though Bach was writing with a tonal vocabulary, he was still writing mostly contrapuntal music, and he was still drawing from music from the church that was, largely modal for his melodic material, especially for his vocal music and his, his sacred music. So really fascinating to analyze, pretty difficult chorale to analyze. I don't think that I'm going to be putting this in my back pocket to give to students or for analysis later on, but definitely an interesting modal-ish chorale. So I really enjoyed today's analysis. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis as well. Thank you so much for watching the video and supporting the channel, and I hope you take care.